right, everybody, we are back for another episode of the Intelligent Edge podcast. My name's Matt Buchalski. I am here with my very intelligent, very handsome co-hosts, Nick Good and Brian Force. And we have an amazing guest today, this Chief Revenue Officer of OneTab AI, Judah Guber, coming to us all the way from Vienna, where it's about a 7-hour time difference from where we're at. And Judah is not letting the nighttime stand in his way of joining us and having a great conversation. So Judah, thanks for joining.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
What is the worst part of Vienna?
I just got here, and I can't say there's anything bad. I haven't seen like Lisbon. I had my complaints where I just came from, but Vienna is just it's a beautiful city. So enjoying it. Also, Lisbon was pouring the whole time. That didn't really help, but yeah.
Fair enough. I'm jealous, man. Appreciate you being on the show.
Of course.
Judah, aside from your geographic position, why don't you take a minute and tell our audience a little bit about you and where you're coming from at OneTab AI?
Sure. So I've been in marketing and sales generally for about a little over 15 years. Started more on the entertainment side, and then I started landing in technology about 6-7 years ago when I got involved in some SaaS companies, including a commercial real estate data platform, which is kind of my intro into the real estate side of things. And then still involved in the technology side, developing some projects, and we did kind of an IT services for a while, and then somebody I had met a long time ago kind of came back around. He did a mobile app for me like 10 years ago, and since then when I met him, he was starting an AI company originally called Videoverse, which became Magnify, and since then he had just exited it for about a little over 300 million, and he wanted to start this company called OneTab. So we connected. I really liked the idea behind it, so I joined up with him. I was kind of a late stage co-founder, and I've really enjoyed the technology side, especially these last 3-4 years. I feel like it's kind of open-ended. It's just the only thing that limits what you can do is basically your imagination at this point. You don't need, like in the past, you needed 20 years of skills and to start out with a base of knowledge from when you were growing up to understand how coding works. Now you can kind of make most technologies happen either with some help or by yourself with not a huge capital spend and not a lot of time. So I'm excited to be involved in technology, excited to see where it goes, and yeah, happy to be here.
Happy to have you, Judith. So just for background, because I think we can take this a lot of different ways, because I think what OneTab is doing is relevant to so many use cases in industry. So I think it'll be a fun conversation for a lot of different people. If you were to sum up kind of what OneTab is, and then maybe kind of what would be relevant, maybe not even competitors, but relevant past companies that OneTab is kind of the future version of, how would you kind of describe that?
Sure. So OneTab also had, much like myself, it also had kind of a path that it took. So it started out, we had a company on the IT services side, which we still have, but that turned into something that we realized that just there's so many different platforms out there. There's so many different solutions. Being able to communicate, have subscriptions, let alone get deep insights into all these different platforms for chat, for project management, API management, it was all disjointed. So we wanted to create one platform with AI built on top of it that allowed you to do everything in one place, have a singular subscription, have your whole team know how to use it, and then get deep insights on top of it. Now that one of the modules in this platform was One Analytics, where if you don't need a data scientist on a separate platform. That has kind of evolved into one of our main solutions called OneReap, which is a knowledge database. So basically, this is an aspect of OneTab which has become really popular, which allows you to just connect basically any data you have, whether it's your CRM, your database, any data sources into one place. And we have AI agents that optimize that solution. So For an example, if you, let's say, connected your CRM system, let's say you used HubSpot, and you wanted to, create a new lead in HubSpot, you would just, in natural language, kind of like you speak to ChatGPT, type that out and say, I want to create a new customer. I want to, start a drip campaign. You would give that command, and it would activate in your within integration into your HubSpot. You could do the same thing with Stripe, with QuickBooks, with many different apps that we're integrated with. So the point is to have one platform that kind of does everything, that everything's connected to it, because when you have your data all in different places, you don't really know what's going on. It's like saying I understand a whole picture, but you can only see like, 100th of it. So you don't know what actions to take, what data is accurate, what's it based on. So the idea is that you connect everything into one place and you can get deep insights into. Initially, it was for your software development lifecycle, but now it's for all aspects of your business.
That's awesome. So when you set out, Judah, it looks like you've been at the company now for a little over 2 years. Like when you go to market, how do you go to market? What's the problem that OneTab is solving that you lead in with your prospects?
So I think it's an interesting question. I think you start out with a philosophy of what you want to solve, and I think, in fact, I just came from this conference, Web Summit in Lisbon, and one of the things they speak about is a lot of people create businesses because they're like, this would be a cool idea, but if it's not something that's an actual painkiller, it's likely not going to get traction. So you try to think about a philosophy that you start with. Ours was about the fact that it was so hard when we worked with different clients and around the world. They'd have different knowledges of different subscriptions, and it would just be a huge pain to be onboarding and work with different teams. So we had this idea of consolidating that information into one place. That turned into consolidating that into software development lifecycle, which turned it into doing it for specific solutions. So let's say you have an HR staffing company, and instead of having to use 6, 7 different platforms, each for specific things, you connect everything into one place. You can create a new employee profile. You can, validate their documents all through one single AI agent solution. It started out with a philosophy, and then you pare it down into how you're going to execute the solve. But I think you normally come at it with kind of an idea of how you want to go about it, and then it is experimentation. Like Slack started out as a internal tool for people for a video game company that they were developing, and they needed an internal tool, and they created Slack, and then Slack became what it was, but that wasn't the initial thing. So a lot of times these things start out with philosophy, and then they evolve into the solution that they become.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I was also taking a look at the website before the podcast, and I like how you've really netted down the solution to like 5 different areas, right? Sales being one of them, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm a CRO as well, and I think sales and the sales tech stack has really evolved over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
late teens, you had Gong and Salesloft and Outreach, and like everything had to be automated, and like
Mm-hmm.
sales leaders, subscribe to these very expensive tech stacks. And there was Clary and playbooks and this and that, and before you know it, you had your RevOps team managing 15, 20 different applications that supported your Salesforce instance. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I really liked about your solution is that it seems to start consolidating, right? You're starting to see that in the market where more solutions is not better, right? They're looking for fewer solutions, less hands on keyboard, duplicating information, pushing information from Salesforce to X system back, so on and so forth. Like what was the vision there? Just curiosity. Like this, I geek out on this stuff, and it's like stuff that I'm solving on a day-to-day basis.
I think I've just heard that pain point from a lot of CROs, and I've been to like CRO summits, and just you hear this same information over and over again. Like I remember like one question about certain ways they do outbound or attribution, and they were like usually like maybe a room full of CROs. There's probably like 15 different tools mentioned. for automating LinkedIn outreach. There was probably at least 8 or 9 different tools mentioned. And you're talking about like all high level CROs. If they're mentioning this many tools, that means there's not a premium tool. It means that there's constant, iterations and experimentation, and it becomes super expensive to not necessarily just subscribe to them, to go on the pain of onboarding and offboarding and onboarding again and teaching your team how to use it. And it becomes, you waste so much time. So I think just hearing that over and over again is when I realized that the issues on the SaaS side, the sales teams normally or sometimes would maybe be outside of, because they'd say, oh, we just have to choose a CRM. That was our thing. And then everything else, was not really, so we didn't have, I didn't feel like we had the same level of pain points that other departments had. Now I think we do. I think the Clay, every all these go-to-market platforms, they're piled on top of each other, and you've no way of paring down what works and what doesn't.
So
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Go ahead, B.
so the kind of the parity here is the starting point is the tech stacks are too disjointed. There's too many tools. There's too many places where data is siloed. There's too many things that don't talk to one another. There's too much onboarding. There's too much training. There's too much of a playbook for a team to know inside and out to be able to execute on a high level. And OneTab comes in, and the solution is to make it less disjointed and make it smoother. But the parity is OneTab is also another tool essentially, right? And so what is one of your favorite use cases where you can say, hey, like, in a lot of our clients' stack, this is a real big gap, right? Where things are very disjointed, and here's actually how the OneTab functionality works to smooth this over and create a really great integration. Like you mentioned HubSpot before. Like, what are some of your favorite use cases in some of your clients' worlds that you find that OneTab does a really good job of bringing a discombobulated set of tools together, and it shows a really big impact in the short term?
Well, I think the fact that I don't really consider us like just a different tool. I consider us like the central point between a lot of tools,
Sure.
so that we're for, integrating HubSpot. Like I mentioned, and you're telling our agent to, create a drip campaign. You're not on HubSpot itself, because again, if you maybe somebody else is coming from Salesforce, a company that uses Salesforce, maybe they're use HubSpot and this company is using Salesforce. So our platform is kind of that middle spot where you connect everything and you speak to it like you would, natural language and typing out, that people are very comfortable. They seem to be comfortable using when they talk to any LLM. So I think that idea that you don't have to necessarily spend a couple weeks learning a new platform each time you switch companies or they switch CRMs. They're just very easy to use, clean interface. You could type whatever you want to it in whatever speak you want to use, and it's going to do that action for you. We also tried to, just simplify a lot of the stuff that was kind of not necessarily streamlined before. Like you have a bunch of leads and you want to bring them into your CRM. We have agents that you can simply drag, and it will integrate and flow directly into the CRM with the fields the way you want it, however your own space is set up. So again, it's just one less thing that you need to have another employee do, because it is basically managing a CRM is another full-time job, and that usually takes away from your sales team, or it's an additional hire. So either way, it's not efficient.
That's a
So,
good point.
yeah, I want to jump on that real quick, B. Like, so Judah, speaking of, like you said, not having another employee manage something. One of our philosophies here at Deep Blue Intelligence is that our belief is that, we believe in AI enhancement, not AI replacement, right? So what is your belief on where kind of employees and humans fit into this AI equation?
Yeah. I actually think about this a ton, because that's like the most common question you get whenever you work in AI is like, you're replacing people. I don't think that, like, people think of, let's say, regular employees, like their workload or their what they're producing to be, say, 100%, which is kind of rare. So maybe 80%, but even let's say 100%, and then you say, well, an AI agent can do 80% of it, so that employee only has to do 20%. I actually just think that employee can now produce 200%. It's not necessarily removing the employee, it's just empowering them, allowing them to be a lot more efficient and productive. So, I mean, it's not a replacement, it's an empowerment tool. I think that's what AI still is going to be for quite a while. I don't think that you still need the way humans think. It's just different. Like the strategy, and AI is trained off of it can supercharge what you produce, but it can't replace it.
Yeah. You know, I had this exact conversation with my mother last night, of all people, over dinner. Um, and the use case was, I have some really good friends that are working on, they're about to deploy early next year. Some of the first blockchain technology in the real estate space to start to record deeds of title, or deeds and records, and essentially revolutionize the way that we record ownership titles and chains of abstract and things like that in the real estate space, which would be it would be an uproot to an entire industry, which is the title insurance industry. And it wouldn't happen all at one time, but it would be fascinating to be able to record chains of history of a property all on blockchain. And my mother was asking. My whole family's in real estate. My sister's in the title business, and she's asking, like, what happens to those people if title companies don't really, I wouldn't say exist, but they don't need that necessary manpower and things like that anymore. I said, look, for every door that technology closes, it's going to open up 5 more doors. It's just you don't
Mm-hmm.
know necessarily what the doors are going to be. And I pointed to the TV above her, and I said, if you told someone in the 1910s that stage plays were probably going to go away at some point for the most part, but those people would become TV producers, that they wouldn't understand what a TV is yet. So you wouldn't be able to have that conversation with them. So the question isn't what are we going to do next, because that might not have an answer yet. There's whole industries that we haven't even synthesized yet that will exist. And so I push back on the narrative that technology or technological advancements, or AI and specifically, is going to be a detriment to humanity. It absolutely can be if it's used for evil. Let's all agree you could do some horrible things with AI if you already have malintent. But when people sometimes ask, okay, so what does the future look like? I get kind of excited at the unknown, because so many cool and relevant things in our daily lives now are things that we wouldn't have been able to imagine would exist even 30 years ago. I mean, if you tried to tell someone in 1980 what one of these things was, I mean, you wouldn't even have a starting point to start to explain to them what the thing is that you're holding in your hand. So I just think it's a super exciting future, and I think the best is yet to come. But I also think that anybody who's kind of anticipating exactly what the future looks like right now is I look at with suspicion a little bit, because there's only so much we can know right now.
Well, I totally agree. I think, yeah, the prophets usually have some hesitancy about, the people who know exactly where things are going to end up. Like, if they knew where things were going to end up, they probably wouldn't tell you, or be that transparent. So
Yeah. So Judah, real quick, I'm really blown away by the diverse use cases that OneTab can satisfy or resolve for your customers. I'm going to assume that it didn't start that way, right? So like, where did OneTab land, and like, how did you go about systematically identifying like the next spoke in the wheel, or the next set of use cases, or the next set of industries that you wanted to bring OneTab to, and how did you go through that process? What did that look like?
I think because we started with something we understood really well, the software development lifecycle. We kind of realized that idea of pitching that without it being a specific vertical solution was kind of tricky. So it does work well, but it works well, and this is something from go to market philosophy, that it works better when you started it from a specific point. So some company wide, they could adopt the platform, but if you start with saying that this is something that solves for something specific in prop tech, or in insurance, or in HR staffing, they're a lot more willing to kind of expand it out and adopt the platform. When you're talking about something super general and you don't quite know who to approach at a company, that becomes trickier. So we started as something very wider that was very much a horizontal solution, and we turned it into a lot more vertical specific solutions that It just made it a lot easier to kind of, now the solution resonates with people in specific industries. Like even if you work in an industry, and I mentioned real estate before, I saw like both of your faces kind of like popped up a little bit, like, oh, okay, he understands a little bit. So it's just when you hear something that solves for an issue in your industry, you light up and it's easier to connect with that person.
Yeah, 100%. And I've had this conversation a couple times in the last few months. I think if you look at successful organizations, and I'll use like Databricks as an example. Databricks has done an amazing job setting up verticalization strategies inside the behemoth of a business that they run. You think about like 4 or 5 years ago, this whole concept of personalization at scale, thinking about like SDRs sending emails, right? That became really cool for a while, and then it got overplayed out, and now it's kind of like on the retreat. But selling horizontally is like a Swiss Army knife. When you can walk into an office and have a vertically oriented conversation specific to real estate or specific to customer service, like specific to life sciences, and your buyer knows, you make it very clear to your buyer that you know their space and then them as the buyer and what their pains are going through. Like, I think that just shortens your sales cycles and makes you that much more relevant, right? People are out there with this whole kind of Swiss Army knife value prop lately, and I don't really think those types of approaches resonate anymore.
I agree. I think a lot of people now, obviously, they hear all about AI and the valuations of some of these companies, and they come over to me and just be like, "Well, how do I get involved in AI?" Like, I wouldn't get involved in AI. Like, what? And I asked them, like, "Well, where did you work before? What industry are you coming from?" They're telling me real estate or finance, and I'd say, in your 10 years or 15 or 20 years in that industry, like what was something that was super, just made no sense, it was super manual and could really really benefit for being automated? And they'd say, I know, they have an idea or two. I was like, if you approach it as I'm trying to solve an issue and AI can help me, that's how I would go about it, as opposed to saying I want to get involved in AI and then shoehorning something that doesn't necessarily make sense into wanting to get involved in a industry that has a lot of buzz. So
Do you feel like kind of being on the front lines of what you're doing? Do you feel like with the advent of just kind of vibe coding and all that type of stuff, do you feel like there are a lot of, you don't have to name names for sure, but do you feel like there are a lot of companies out there that are doing exactly what you just mentioned right now? It's like we're coming up with the cool stuff first. We don't really have a specific problem to solve our use case, but look at the cool thing we just built and how shiny it is. I feel like,
yes, yeah,
and they're getting
yes.
valuations, and a lot of it doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't, because there are a lot of those vibe codings that are all kind of have similar functionality, but they all have crazy valuations, and they all have great growth numbers, and then even the ones after it will also raise crazy amounts of money and be in the same boat, but they're going to have to produce the same results at the same rate of growth that they've been doing, and it becomes really really difficult. And that's usually when you speak to entrepreneurs who will talk about what happened in the past and how the entrepreneurial journey was, and they'll say, like, I thought I was doing so well, and then I realized I had to keep it up, like not just keep it up doing well, but keep up at the same rate that I was doing well, and they'll get so behind the eight ball that they
Let,
get
let's
really
be honest with
frustrated.
you, Judah. I'd settle for a same rate. As you do
Same
better,
rate. I know.
it's like a higher rate.
Yeah. So someone, yeah, I was at a dinner of a bunch of founders and VCs the other night, and they were talking about, like, oh, ARR. Let's say you've been around for like 2 or 3 years. We're like, oh, you have 3-4 million ARR, and they were like, oh, that's pretty good. Be like, no, that used to be pretty good. Right now, that doesn't mean anything. Like, you would need 10 million ARR within a year or two. I'm like, that's a rough standard to set.
It's a rough standard, and if it's always interesting to me how really smart people can, as a group, tend to develop some blind spots. Because at the end of the day, if the expectation of the standard in an industry is increasing every year, your ARR used to need to be 2 or 3 for you to be an impressive small to mid-sized company. Now it needs to be 10, 15. there's only so much capital to go around this. By the way, there's only so many human beings on the face of the earth to spend money on any of these solutions. So when the standard continues to increase at a certain velocity that outpaces spend, outpaces wages, outpaces, at the end of the day, there's a person down here somewhere who's got to come out of pocket to pay a company for a solution. And when a standard continues to increase and increase and increase, I feel like that's exact definition of a bubble in a space. But we don't, and then when it happens, we call it a black swan that nobody could have seen coming.
You're not wrong. I do think that's why I say I think there's a difference between like what people would describe as a bubble, which is just that valuations are very frothy right now, and this being not a real thing. Like AI is definitely a real thing. It's not going anywhere. It's changing the world and changing so many industries. If you want to go valuation by valuation and like what certain companies are valued at, even public companies, it's crazy. It's not in line with anything, earnings or otherwise. But there's still something. This technology is very real and it will change most industries.
So on that, and I know we're going really far down kind of like the capital markets side of this now, but where do you see that from a guy who's on the front lines? Like where do you see this going over the next 5 or 10 years in the same framing as maybe like the dot-com bubble, where the internet obviously still here, right? It revolutionized humanity in a way that had never been revolutionized before, more impactful than the Industrial Revolution, right? But at the same time, we learned in 1999, early 2000, some websites are really dumb. We don't need we had some crazy online companies with some crazy valuations. I remember reading Jim Cramer's Confessions of a Street Addict, his memoir, and whenever his company, TheStreet.com, went public, he was locked into his stock. He couldn't sell it. But he even reflects on that book, like, my website was a blog about stocks. It was never near worth that $80 million on day one that they had it valued. Like, it's a blog. That stuff's free now, Where do
Yeah.
you think we're going when it comes to some of these AI vibe coding companies?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a time you could time it perfectly and be the Mark Cuban and get out exactly for something that, would not have lasted probably more than a year. But if you think back to that, dot com 90s internet craze, the huge companies, they're actually still here. They're the biggest companies in the world, So I do think it's going to be similar where the largest companies that we talk about today, the Nvidias, they're going to still be there in 20, 30 years as one of the biggest companies in the world. But a lot of the companies that maybe raised, 250 million in a Series C, most of them are not going to be there, or the ones there will be a few that make it. Like you said, like Databricks is an example. Like that one's not. I don't think that's going anywhere. There are some major companies that really know what they're doing. Cybersecurity companies, especially, I think is pretty solid industry. That's another example of a painkiller that really hard to. It's like they have a very low rate of churn because once you get into cybersecurity, people aren't leaving. But yeah, I think it's going to be similar. I think the massive companies are still going to be there at crazy valuations and do really well. And there are a lot of the companies that were just really well funded that a fraction of them are going to make it.
Yeah. I want to just follow up that on one question, if you don't mind, Judah. So we're talking about the potential of an AI bubble, right? Tons of money coming into the ecosystem, lots of interest, lots of excitement. But 3 or 4 years ago, there was, billions and billions of dollars coming into SaaS companies, right? If you had a subscription model and a predictable revenue model and you were showing certain ARR growth, right? You could just stick your hand out and a VC was going to drive by and probably hand you a few million bucks, right?
Yes, for
Now,
sure.
the narrative right now is that valuations on many SaaS companies, including some very well-known companies, those valuations have shrunk over the course of the last 18 or 24 months as capital kind of became a little bit more selective, the economy changed, etc. AI got on the rise. So, like you mentioned that you had dinner with VCs or something recently. Are VCs concerned about that capital being tied up in slower growth investments and being reluctant to jump into AI, or are they finding new sources of capital? Like, how are they balancing the portfolio between the assets, the money that they invested into SaaS companies and what they want to invest in from an AI perspective?
Really good question.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. From the sentiments I've heard, I think all the big shift has been invest in SaaS and then invest in AI. And now it's just a little more intentional invest in AI, where they're not necessarily doing the same volume of deals that they had, a year or two ago. Maybe because of the SaaS. Also, whether AI is going to be more like what SaaS is and has evolved to, or AI is going to be a completely own thing. Point is, it's still very much evolving, and you don't quite know where the industry is going to end up and what areas are going to be the most popular or the highest rate of revenue. And so I think it's harder to say where things are going. So I think they're just being a little more intentional. Like if you have a game changing technology, they're still going to be very interested in it. But I think even a lot of those SaaS companies, they've tried to repaint themselves as AI companies. Like Salesforce, they speak about their AI agent solutions now much more than they talk about their CRM. Like I don't have you ever seen like their earnings call them mention the CRM that much? Maybe it's at the end. Like they'll start out talking with about AI agents for quite a while before they get to that.
Yeah. That's a really good question though. And makes me think because if we're talking about valuations being frothy and things like that, and Judah, you might not be on the front lines of this particular aspect, but I know you know a lot of VCs. I mean, how many of these AI, let's just call them startup companies, are pre-revenue and they're still really living off of their initial investments or their Series B or whatever it is, and they really haven't made a dollar on their own just yet, but they've got a concept that they're running with. But if the capital markets start to get a lot more intentional with who they're betting on and the horses that they're putting their money behind, how many of them just can't survive until they start to really come to market and actually are able to start to stand on their own? How many of them actually have great concepts that just you can only bet on so many horses at a time, and how many of them fall by the wayside before they really get off the ground? I don't know. That's just I think that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, no, I think I worry about that. It's kind of, like you're there could be a business that could be absolutely game changing and huge and just transform an industry, but they just never see the light of day because that the investors that they go to, either all the investors they go to, pass on it, or the investors they go to just got burned by, three or four other investments and they just don't have the capital to make it.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I actually think about that a lot and why I think it's beneficial to like try to cut out some of that middle ground of companies that let it play out. That's what healthy industries do. That's what there are corrections even in private markets where certain businesses make it and certain businesses don't, and then other companies come to the forefront.
Sure. I want to jump back just to the platform itself for a second. I could talk about the market side of things all day. How how far away are we, do you think, from never actually touching some of the tools on the back end of our stack that we use, like really ever touching them again, meaning like we go to one single interface that we're interacting with that now is connecting our entire customized stack, whatever we want to build in the background. We now have, this is essentially what OneTab is leading the charge on. How close are we to never really logging into our HubSpot again? We're simply going to one interface, and AI is so good at that point that anything and everything we need to interact with and to execute on our daily tasks, we're in one interface, and that's all we use.
Yeah, I think it's shifted a lot. Like if you look back from where things started a long time ago when people were using real databases and spreadsheets and documents, then it evolved a little bit, and then evolved a little bit more and people were doing searches and evolved a little bit more into SaaS tools where people were having to learn how to use their CRM or whatever SaaS tool they use. Now it's evolved again. I think a lot of it does have to do with ChatGPT's popularity, but there are a lot of LLMs, Anthropic, Gemini, all doing like amazing work on this front too. But now people are getting a lot more comfortable speaking to a chatbot like they're writing an email to somebody or talking to a friend. That's how people engage. it might change again. I think a lot of, including a lot of platforms are working on voice as well. That might be the new mode of, communications, where instead of writing out what you want an agent to do, you're saying, you start a drip campaign, start, to CTOs in this vertical, and time it out every 3 weeks or something like that, and you're done. Like, that might be the new mode of interaction, but I think for now people are still very comfortable with how they speak to ChatGPT or LLM. So I do think that we're kind of there. That is why it has gotten to this point where you're not necessarily going into the tool. It gives you the ability to speak to it in a way that everyone, I think, there are very few people who are not utilizing it in some aspects. So I do think we're there.
Judah, I I listened to an episode of a podcast a few months ago. Brian McCarthy, who's president at Rubrik and my old boss, was on the show, and he was talking about how they create competitive advantage by running like 3-month enablement cycles with their sales team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Market's changing quickly. They want to stay in front of competitive advantage. They want to make sure that they're speaking to the pains of their buyers, their ICPs, the businesses they sell to, et cetera, et cetera. Like, as a CRO of OneTab, does that resonate with you? And how are you kind of guiding your sales force to changing macroeconomic climates? You're in Europe right now, so geographic conditions, resonance in the market, other products coming in fast and furious. Like, how are you keeping up with that sort of iterative schedule in your sales organization?
I think it's just a lot of experimentation, which is not any different than, sales have been since the beginning of time, but I think a lot of experimentation. So I think anytime you just stay stagnant on any strategy over, even 3 months is a pretty long period in sales these days, and you will try out different strategies, and there's so much noise out there, and it's just so interesting that the modes of communication have changed so much. And I speak to my sales team about this a lot, that they'll say, "Oh, how's email going?" And I know that there's very little chance that they're going to be able to make a ton of headway on email, just because of the amount of volume and noise, and the companies that are sending things out there. LinkedIn, and just that type of outreach in general, I think, is something that is not going anywhere anytime soon. That seems to be the new mode of getting people to, at least start a conversation. And like I said, I think the tools are changing, but I think this is one thing that I heard this at a LinkedIn event not long, a few months back, and said that instead of messaging to try to get like an action from somebody, like trying to schedule a demo, don't message for that reason. Don't message as if you're trying to sell. Just send the message that you think will emotionally resonate with somebody. And you're making a connection. You don't quite know the value will be directly through that person, or through somebody that person knows, or that will schedule a demo. But if you do it because you're trying to elicit value from somebody, and you're not really giving any value back, it's very unlikely someone's going to want to respond. No one's trying to no one has the time to do people random favors get random DMs on LinkedIn. But if you send an emotionally resonating message, or something about the work that person's doing, or something that gives them some value, they're much more likely to want to reply. So I think that is almost more important, and the mode of how you do that is more important than the type of the type of content you send really matters a lot more than the mode of communication that you're using.
I love that. Okay.
Judah, speaking of all the noise, right? And that's one thing that we always talk about. There's just so many different directions we can all go in. How do you kind of lead your people and your team to cut out that noise? And then how do you continue to evolve? Like, where do you guys see yourself 5 years from now?
So I think doing that, when you divide up your team, and I think I mentioned this a little earlier about targeting verticals, but I think you have to have a sales team that is vertically targeted as well. If you create a generalist sales team that kind of pitches to everyone, but no one has any idea who else is in the portfolio from that vertical, or they don't really know what they're talking about regarding that specific solution, it's going to be really hard for them to connect with the people they're pitching. I think having delineating your sales team into subject matter experts makes them understand what other clients you have in that area, being able to speak to somebody about that specific solution. Obviously, if they had any experience in that area beforehand, so they did work in real estate beforehand, or they did, work in finance beforehand, and speaking to them about that is just, it becomes so much of an easier conversation. And like, people in those industries don't really want to connect with the generalists. They want to connect with the specialists. So I think just dividing up the sales team into subject matter experts is something that I found to be extremely helpful. And I think it's going to be a lot of that. I think it's just specializing in certain areas. Like they say that when you start a company, and this kind of answers a question about the 5-year thing too, that you start out with a bunch of generalists. Like, you don't hire specialists for a number of years, just because you need people that don't mind doing 5 different things. Then eventually you need the specialist. You need somebody that really knows a specific area. So I think that's kind of like how I see this too. Like, right now I've kind of started with a bunch of generalists, but trying to move that into subject matter experts for specific verticals.
I did an interview with a CEO of a company who said the exact same thing on Sunday, right? There are about 25 people now. He's like, the first 5 or 6 hires we made, we hired generalists. And from then on, we hired people that were really good at one thing, and we made their job super specific. And they're tackling a really big opportunity right now, and it's just literally almost verbatim about what he said. So
Smart man, smart man.
yeah, smart. You're on to something, Judah.
Yeah.
Next, you guys.
Judah, just I think we're coming up on time here, so I want to be cognizant. But let's talk about things, just kind of from a human perspective, right? So you're CRO of a company, you're traveling, you're kind of in the thick of it with AI. Like, how do you, as a person, stay energized with what you're doing? And then second follow-up question to that is, how are you using AI just from a human perspective to make yourself more productive, keep yourself sane, deal with the travel, right? Stay in tune to your family, so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, it's become a little too handy in certain respects, where you get used to saying like, oh, this, I have a bunch of food in the house. What recipe can I make for this? Or I'm traveling, make a 3-day itinerary starting from this day to this day in this city. So I think you can get a little too used to it, but I think the important thing to do, to both connect it to who you are while still using a tool that really helps you maximize your time, is to use it as a framework where, if I always tell you, do never use it to copy and paste into social posts or anything like that. But using it to create a framework is great. Like that issue that people have with white paper syndrome, where they can't write anything if they just see a blank paper in front of them. It does essentially remove that. Like, you can just come up with something that's a template and then change it around. The way the human mind thinks, it makes it so much easier when you have some ideas in front of you. So I think I use it as a framework for something like, oh, that reminded me of something else that I think I wanted to do or I could do. So I think using it as that, while still staying somewhat grounded, and like, travel does help. I think stepping out of, I'm in New York most of the time. I've been lucky to go to a number of conferences in the last year and just travel also for vacation, and I think travel just, it mixes up your environment. When you get that, you kind of force yourself to take a break and take a beat and think of things a little differently. And you forget about that until you travel again, and you're like, oh yeah, this is, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone. So I think that's super helpful, and I like working with different. Obviously, OneTab AI is our huge opportunity right now, but I kind of advise and I speak to a number of different companies in the AI space. There are just some really exciting things going on, and a companies that I think will empower people to be better at their work and empower industries. So I think a lot of that is when you have a kind of a blank space, both in terms of your imagination of what you can create in technology. And I didn't have this background before this. I started in technology, and then I just got really into it, and I kind of love that. You're only limited by your own imagination. So
Great answer.
Judah, on another personal note, are you going to get on the wait list for that Neo robot so you can start doing all your chores at home?
I might actually. It's high up on the list. I'm sure
It looks pretty cool.
Be a good holiday present.
That's right.
That one looks pretty cool. Did you see the Russian one, AI though, that fell on its face yesterday?
Yeah,
It had too much vodka.
Yeah,
it's drinking problem in Russia already. I saw a few actually that were at this conference I went to. And one of them was actually, I took a video of it. He was asking this robot who was just like kind of using an AI voice that what's the difference between AI and AGI, and just hearing a robot explain the difference between artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence there's some irony in that whole thing of making like an AI say why humans are, either not as good or smart or robots are better. It was kind of funny to me that he was doing that, but yeah, it's pretty entertaining.
We're on the precipice of something pretty crazy. But
yes,
I'm
absolutely. Absolutely.
You know what's really crazy though? I'll close with this, but I'm about to. It's crazy to say this, but I'm a few years away from being 50, right? And so like Terminator and Running Man and all these movies that happened in the future are now in the past. And I think James Cameron came out a few months ago and says that we are now at a point with AI that he says like we're Skynet capable, which absolutely scared the crap out of me.
Yeah. It's true, and now they have the robots to actually execute this. It's not just
Exactly.
So Judah, can kind of tell people, just so we can have it. We'll put it in the show notes and everything. Where can people find you? What is it? You said you're going into that more specialist route. Where do you see people using the OneTab tool in general? Is it? I was looking at your real estate tab, by the way, Brian. I think we need to check that out for homework. So where can people find you and kind of demo the product?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find OneTab AI. OneReap.com is our specific AI knowledge database solution. But yeah, I'd love for people to reach out, DM me if you want to. Either you are building technology, you want to build technology, you're interested in automating any of your operations in the verticals of prop tech, fintech, insurance. Yeah, no, I'd love to talk to people. I love to talk to people in general, just either interested or in AI or technology. Yeah, no, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate that you guys reached out to me.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you, buddy, and enjoy your trip. And if you've enjoyed this show, please make sure to go like and subscribe and just leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're on Spotify, go ahead and leave that review. That way we can go ahead and get more guests just like Judah. So again, thank you guys for watching.
Appreciate the time, brother. We'll see everybody next time.
Yeah.